First of all, thank you all for joining. Really appreciate you tuning in today. Today we'll be going through like what I'm going to call like systematic sourcing. How do we improve our process, build something that is repeatable, and more specifically, especially as we're starting to scale, how can we define it so that we can delegate it um, in a way that is like safe and protecting our profit. So a lot of what we're going to talk about today is how do we build out a system that very specifically protects our profit, not just about trying to like make more profit. And I'll try to clarify what I mean here later on. We had about 60 people register for this, so I wanted to just get like a quick background on me and I guess like why I'm talking about this and why I'm so passionate about it. So I started like exactly 4 years ago. Went full time beginning of January back in 2024. So we were doing about $1 million a year then. Switched to wholesale full time March of 2024, so shortly after switching. That was because of a cease and desist letter we had, so that's a long story. But we'll plan on doing about 12 million this year in sales. And then speaking to that a little bit further, at the beginning of the year, we started with 3 sourcers. We've scaled to 7. So I'm not involved in any of the hiring, training, onboarding, etc. And that's because we have very explicit criteria. So essentially our sourcers are trained within a week, up and running independently. And normally after the first month, they're already sourcing over 20,000 a month independently without much oversight. So we'll go through that criteria here today too. So when I think of sourcing, I think it's really broken into like 3 steps or criteria that we'll want to consider. So first and foremost, we want to make sure that we validate that a distributor is legitimate. So confirming the authenticity and credibility, making sure that we're purchasing from someone that Amazon would most likely approve of, right? So there's a lot of good options out there in the gray market, but I don't want to risk deactivation. And of course, we're all trying to build a sustainable business, so it's not worth taking a one-off for slightly higher profit. Then once the distributor has been opened, how do you go about narrowing that search and allowing, say, a VA to go through a 1 million item catalog in like a week or two? So we'll go through like what our sourcing criteria is there. And then finally, once we actually are going through the sourcing process, how do we purchase the correct items, protect our profit, and improve our margins? All right. So as I see quite a few people joining in, want to do a quick poll just to get a gauge of where everyone's at. So speaking specifically about like wholesale and OA, how confident are you in identifying like a legitimate distributor or retailer? So A, you have no idea. It's always a risk. B, I go by feel, but I'm not 100% sure. C, I can do it by intuition and I'm confident. Or D, like I have strict criteria that ensures authenticity and I don't have any concerns. If you can drop in the chat real quick. D, okay, that's good, John. D, perfect. Oh, okay, well then I'll be really quick through this. All D's today. All right, perfect. Well, I'll be curious to see how much overlap there is. So how do we know if a distributor is good? We do go ahead and put 6 criteria. So 1, we want them to identify themselves as a distributor. Looking through all of our accounts, so we have over 200 distributor or wholesale accounts. We purchased from 28 of them. Every single one defines themselves as a distributor. So not a retailer and not even a wholesaler. And we'll talk about the difference a little bit in one of the slides coming up. They, of course, want to have an apply option or register, not that anyone can just log in, no pricing displayed, multiple brands. And I explicitly state this because I've trained 3 different VAs on wholesale distributors. And I always get a bunch of brands being presented. We want to make sure they have 50 plus employees. We'll talk about why that is. Same with multiple locations, because that will help you guys on the front end spend a little bit more time to save your team on the back end with sourcing. All right, so sorry, I threw EE distribution up here. I hope I'm not giving anyone's honey hole out, but I think it's pretty well known. So distributor validation 1 of 6, they identify as a distributor, so of course not a retailer or a wholesaler. So as I have gone further into this path of like wholesale, I'm learning that the better accounts actually define themselves as a distributor of goods. And it seems to be that they are most likely the ones purchasing from the brands themselves. Once I start talking to wholesalers, they tend to be around my level, maybe like right around that 8-figure cutoff. they're purchasing from a distributor, they're not purchasing from a brand, and therefore their pricing isn't really good enough to be competitive for Amazon. So we've started weeding out wholesalers as well, simply because their pricing is not good enough. And then just making sure that there's like no B2C sales. If they're doing any front-facing sales to customers, most likely their pricing is going to be inadequate, or they have strict margin criteria that they're going to have to maintain and won't be able to lower the price. 206 is just making sure they have an apply or register option. It seems pretty straightforward. They're not going to display pricing. They're not going to allow anyone to purchase from them. They have to go through a validation process to maintain good standing with the brands that they have partnerships with. All right. Cannot display pricing. So there are wholesalers and distributors out there that will throw up like MSRP or retail pricing. Of our 28 good distributors, only one of them displays pricing publicly. And that's because I have a personal relationship with the sales rep. So I'm able to get pricing that wouldn't be normally viable for other people. So we have this as a very strict criteria that if there's any pricing displayed for new distributors, we automatically cut them out. As we're going through this, I'm sure you're thinking, well, we're cutting out a bunch of potential distributors and wholesalers on the front end. And that's because if we spend a little bit more time on the front end, we're saving our self-sourcing, we're saving applications, we're saving submitting forms like sales tax exemptions, and we're also saving our team the time of going through only to find out that they're not a worthy distributor. So logins required to find pricing. Making sure they have multiple brands. I'd say like 10 to 15% of what I get before we included this was brands and having to clarify. If there's a brand that has 2 or 3 brands underneath it, we decline that as well because we want to be forthright and we would want to have an LOA, but that would be a separate discussion. Distributor validation 506. So 5 and 6 are both going to be some clarifying factors that we've included to try to get a distributor that's the size that we need in order to be aggressive with pricing. So we go to their LinkedIn, we check that there's 50 plus employees, and we kind of verify that the LinkedIn then matches the company website. So what we have found is these like smaller shops that have, the 15 to 20 people, they're not large enough to be able to negotiate the deals, right? So if you include myself and all of our VAs, we have about a team of 14. It would be really difficult for me to be able to get appropriate pricing to be able to then sell to you guys, to then sell on Amazon because there's not enough margin. However, in another like 2 or 3 years, as we start getting up to like say 50 employees, that's when I believe we'll be able to start getting pricing low enough to be able to resell. And that's kind of what we're targeting. We don't have any distributors below the 50 employee mark. And that's kind of why we made it a cutoff criteria to help us on the front end. All right. And I know some of you guys might disagree with this one. We want to find multi-locations. So ironically, EE Distribution does not have multiple locations. They come fully out of a warehouse. So you guys might be saying like, here's a perfect example of one that is a legitimate distributor that only has one location. So this rule can't exist. I'm going to assume most of us don't buy from EE Distribution because it's so saturated and the pricing is not competitive enough. As we go through and evaluate our 28 distributors, 27 of them have multiple warehouse locations across the country. So again, being really strict on our filters up front allows for us to be more successful on the back end when we're going through and doing evaluation. It's protecting your time with applications. In regards to the location though, you're going to want to Google Maps a couple of them. Make sure it's a legitimate facility, commercial. You don't want to have like a P.O. box. We were looking at one that honestly looked really good on LinkedIn, and it was a flea market setup. So you'll be surprised when you go into Google Maps. All right, so I went through that really quick for you guys. We'll see where we land on this poll. So when you guys are sourcing, how confident are you when sourcing a distributor? Like, do you guys have a specific process that you go through? Do you guys like A, wing it, B, you find some ASINs but not enough, C, you get a lot but you're missing some, or D, you have a built-in system that finds everything? And I'll define what everything is here shortly. B, okay. Thank you, Karina. C, John. C, okay, perfect. So you guys are finding success within wholesale. That makes a lot of sense. You guys might scoff a little bit at these next few slides. It's really time intensive, but it's not too bad. Okay, so there's two ways to source a distributor. Preemptively, I want to state that we've been doing Keepa Product Finder exclusively for 2 years now. We just started introducing the UPC scanner, and we can talk about like where that fits into our systems now. But comparing the two, the UPC scanner we're finding is about 7 times as fast as Keepa Product Finder. We use it for a first pass to do an initial sourcing sweep. So if the UPC scanner comes back and like nothing's profitable, I'm not going to have someone dedicate a week or two to go through it. Comparing promotions, we found that the UPC scanner actually found 84% of the same products that Keepa Product did. So again, it actually did better results than we would have expected. However, my business is built off of like fully replenishables. And I would argue that the 16% that wasn't found by the UPC scanner are going to be the ones more likely to be replenishables because so many people focus on UPC scanners to be able to do high volume. Okay. Essentially, just a quick comparison. Like I said, UPC scanners, pros, great for large catalogs. It's going to be one-time opportunities. Some of our distributors say, hey, there's going to be a big sale tomorrow. Here's 20,000 UPCs. Good luck. All right. So excellent for first pass screening, but we also sometimes max our usage out. So it's going to keep a product finder. You guys have probably heard me on podcasts talking about these criteria for a while, and we haven't changed them since we started. So these have been good for the past 2 years. And I think they'll continue to be our minimum criteria. So we keep it super simple. We keep it at 500,000 BSR or less. So depending on your niche, you might have to like throttle this up and down. If you're in health and household, maybe 1 million is more appropriate, right? Because it's such a large category. But for us, 500,000 BSR is kind of like the sweet spot for where we want to be. Because anything above that starts to break some of our sourcing criteria that we'll cover later. We put in the correct brand, ensuring the authenticity and listing accuracy. And we'll kind of go through what that looks like and how impactful that is. And then, of course, Amazon, we want out of stock at least 50% of the time. For us, you can sometimes compete with Amazon, but if I'm being mindful of our sourcers' time, we're less likely to be competitive if Amazon's on the listing. So we go ahead and filter those out. All right, so filter 1 of 3, 500,000 BSR or less, reduces the noise. I'm sure most of us are familiar with this filter. So if you go into Keepa Product Finder and put in just this filter, you'll finish around 66 million products. It's like quite a few to go through. Filter 2 of 3, we're now adding the brand. So in this example, I use Clinique, knowing that it wouldn't be any of our brands. Not throwing anyone's brands under the bus here publicly. So that drops it down to 818 products. So starting to get to like a manageable threshold. It forces us to source the correct brands only and not any noise. Specifically in my space, there's a lot of false brands because a lot of them will try to mix the names of some of the popular brands. So this goes ahead and keeps our store and account safe. And then finally, it's just the Amazon out of stock at least 50% of the time. So you'll see we went from 800 products, adding this filter brought us down to 72. And if you have a distributor catalog of 500, 600 products, 72 is very manageable on a brand by brand basis. So it reduces the time. As I mentioned, if Amazon's in stock, likely we cannot compete competitively on price. So this process here, we essentially pull up a distributor's catalog, the brand list, and we go A through Z, and we go brand by brand using these exact same 3 filters. And this is our whole like wholesale sourcing methodology. So it seems really simple and basic, but it's very teachable. You spend a lot of time perhaps looking at products that are going to be unprofitable, but essentially ensures that you don't miss anything. I'll say it because I know they're not going to watch this, but I have 2 friends that have opened up the same distributor that I have. That's our primary account, and neither of them have been able to make it work. And even though I've told them, I know none of them have gone through this same process of sourcing, and they've been missing a lot of products as a result. They're kind of like choosing, maybe I'm interested in Clinique or some other brand, and they kind of just pick and choose, and they're not methodically going through the full catalog. So I think if you guys go through this process, you'll find a lot more replenishable products that wouldn't otherwise be found. Okay. Poll 3, leading into our actual sourcing criteria. So does your sourcing criteria ensure that you're going to make smart decisions? A would be no, I keep getting burned. B, not really. Some are winners, others are losers. C, mostly we're trending up, but sometimes you're struggling. Or D, it's all quantified, easily outsourced, and we're just always in the green. Karina, I see C. John, C. Okay. So you guys are doing pretty well then. That's good to hear. Okay. We'll see if you guys disagree with any of these. And if you guys disagree with any of these, throw your hand up or throw it in the chat. I'd love to like discuss and get some like Q&A interactions going. Okay. So here's the 11 criteria. We'll go through each of these and kind of talk about what each of them are. So I'll read through them really quickly and then summarize kind of like how we categorize them. So do all the product details match, making sure that we're buying the correct ASIN. We talked about brand being correct, suppliers legitimate, specifically for those doing OA. Back when we did OA, we had a list of retailers that we said were authorized to be purchased from. And then if someone wanted to source a new one, we would ask them to submit it for approval, because I don't want a VA spending 2 to 3 days going through a retailer that I wouldn't feel comfortable purchasing from, because you emotionally feel obligated to make those purchases after they put in the work. Making sure the listing is at least 6 months old, offer count greater than 2, not including Amazon or the brand. Making sure we're at least break even over the last 12 months. Suggested list price is less than 110% of the buy box 90-day average. So we do a lot of sales above the buy box. So if the buy box is 100, but our VAs, based off of like our sourcing criteria, might think that we can sell it at 120, they are allowed to, as long as they can prove why. So we'll discuss that. We do ROI greater than 30%. We don't go lower than that for many reasons, and we'll talk about it on that slide. We want each ASIN to equate to at least 75 profit per month, at least 5 times as many sales for competitive offers, and then minimum just general 20 sales per month. So it's a lot, and it's a little bit all over the place. So if we're like summarizing what the criteria really does, 2 of the 11 are making sure that we have the correct details, just selling the correct products. 4 of them prevent money loss, right? So it's not like, oh, we want to make this much money, but it's protecting us from losing money. 3 of them are about avoiding headaches and saving my time. And only 2 of them are actually about, we want to make this much money, which would be ROI, and I want to make this much money per month. All right. So sourcing criteria 1 of 11. Obviously, we need to make sure the brand matches up. Has to be exactly. So we'll go slightly deeper on the next slide. But this one here would be fine. Confirming like the size matches. So I do a lot of like tools space. So it's pretty easy. But if you're doing like makeup, beauty, etc., making sure like 3 fluid ounces, 4.2 fluid ounces is all identical. Because if you do get audited, you'll want to make sure that you have proper invoices, order confirmations, and shipping information to prove that you did send in the correct product. I know when we first started, we might have been willing to like lean a little bit into that like gray market. But Amazon continues to become more strict, and we want to make sure that we're abiding by these all the time. A perfect example is we sell there's an item that you can sell on Amazon as a 10-pack. We can only purchase them in the 12-pack, and it is like manufacturer's packaging. We don't want to break those apart because Amazon can be a little bit stringent on being classified as new. So again, we're always trying to be really conservative because I want to avoid headaches, and I think there's plenty of ASINs out there to be able to source. So model number for us is really important. That's how most of our invoices. And unlike a lot of other people, we don't actually care about the UPCs. UPCs change over time. I've only been burned by this once, and I still ended up breaking even when all things were said and done. And we can't rely on UPCs to always match. or else we would just use UPC scanners. And most of our replenishables are going to be on products where the UPCs don't necessarily match. So we want to make sure the top 4 here all do match, and then the UPC one, we're in different one, but I thought it was worth calling out. All right. One of the reasons we like Keepa Product Finder is because it forces us to do the correct brand. So Nike, New Balance, and Adidas, as they're spelled up here, perfect. Like, for example, this New Balance here is an incorrect brand. So we would want to automatically flag that out. It's a large enough brand, so I'm not too worried. For those who sell Milwaukee, you know what I'm talking about. There's going to be like 30 different misspellings for that brand. And we just wanted to go ahead and avoid all of that and make sure that we're being safe. So searching the brand, if you're unable to find the brand through Keepa Product Finder, go ahead and search the brand and like a product on Amazon. Most likely, the first thing that comes up is going to be the correct brand because it's going to be the fastest selling item. Check the brand and double check. But then if you copy and paste that brand into Keepa Product Finder, that's how our team goes about identifying the correct brand name for Keepa Product Finder. All right. Talked about it earlier. Reputable suppliers and legitimate distributors, specifically within wholesale. If you're doing OA or RA, we used to do this process to find a lot of like cool little niche stores. So using Clinique, if you go to their like store for like where you're able to purchase these from, start throwing in a bunch of different zip codes. You'll start seeing, so in this example here, there's like 3 different types of stores that I've never heard of previously that would be authorized by Clinique to sell their products. And I know for certain that Amazon does do this to verify specifically within the OA space because we've had to send screenshots previously proving it, and then we've gotten our account health corrected. So those within the wholesale, some of them also have distributor location options, and this is a great way to find distributors that you've now proven are authorized. So I'll throw that tidbit here as well. All right. Now we're going to talk about saving money. So sourcing criteria 4 of 11 is making sure the listing's at least 6 months old. We want to make sure that we're protecting the ROI. In the last webinar, we talked extensively about how quickly money can slip with like leaks and how quickly ROI can fade. So we want to make sure that we're not setting ourselves up to lose money. You're less likely to have compliance risks. Amazon bots are, of course, going through all their ASINs all the time, but the ones at an improved BSR are more likely to be captured by their bots, in my opinion, than other ones. And the longer that it's on there, the better chance that one of their bots is going to capture this. So I'm sure for those of you who have joined new listings previously, you've probably gotten like some weird safety, food, drug, compliance risks at some point. So using this like Keepa graph as an example, if we would have jumped on it back in like February or March, we very likely would have assumed like $11.99, $12.99 as a reasonable sale price. However, shortly after, we can now see that $9, $9.99 is more likely, and we could have set ourselves up to lose. So when we have a new listing like that, we want to always see at least 6 months history before jumping on. Just like a lot of these rules, there's always an exception. So if it's 100% ROI and it's been around for 3 months, yeah, we'll give it a shot, right? Like the reward outweighs the risk. But for the most part, this is one of the things that I kept burning myself on 2 years ago. So we implemented the rule and seen a lot of improvements as a result. All right. Criteria 5 of 11, at least 2+ sellers. So this one's going to be about removing headaches and protecting your time as a seller. So we want to see at least 2 sellers that are not Amazon, nor the brand, nor an authorized partner of the brand. So what I mean, for a lot of you guys will probably know the seller name pattern. They all do brand exclusives. They're going to lead into IP complaints, etc. So this one here is a perfect example that he's on it. There's at least one other offer. We wouldn't even touch it because I don't want to have that headache. I don't want IP complaints. I don't want C&Ds. I don't want to have to worry about recalling inventory, selling on eBay, or like accumulating in a death pile. So plus when you guys get C&Ds, I'm assuming you guys also liquidate and probably break even. So it's better just to prevent all of this on the front end. I also find that on your example of searching, Did you say you're doing that through the brand website? Whoops. Let's see here. Sorry, Cassie. Let me jump back to yours. I don't look at the chat very well enough. On your example of searching the Clinique locations and sourcing criteria number 3, did you say you're doing that? Yeah, through the brand website. I believe this was for Clinique, where I went to Clinique authorized retailers, and it linked me to this one. I'm pretty sure it was Clinique because I was trying to be very like timid on using brands that other people could sell. But if you're also looking for distributors, this is a way that we do it. So I'd say a fair amount of brands allow you to select a retailer or distributor. And 2 of our 3 best distributors have come about this way as well, where either identifying them or doing a brand outreach, and they actually do. And one time they actually introduced us to the brand or to the distributor, and another one is they directed us to the distributor. I forwarded the email to the distributor, and they set us up with an account. So it works for OA and wholesale. John, I see you say FBM or FBA. Was that in regards to the sourcing criteria here for number 5?
That's for the 2 sellers.
Okay. Yep. So I would accept FBA or FBM as long as it's not the same seller, right? For the people who do both fulfillment methods. So if you were on a listing as FBM and Ed was on it as FBI, I'd say we're good to go. We'll go ahead and sell on it. But at this, especially within our niches, we've seen the same like authorized people for specific brands, and they're pretty easy to see. So like Buck Knives would be one of them, where it's like Buck Knives authorized, and they have like one other brand underneath it. Like we avoid those people as well, just because we don't want to conflict with those. All right. Now we're getting into my favorite rule. I threw this up on Facebook the other day as well. But this is probably the single most important rule that saved us the most amount of money since implementing it. And it was the easiest way for me to explain to our VAs of what I was trying to avoid. So we want to make sure that we're at least break even over the last 12 months. So this helps us prevent the losses, of course, right? We want to plan for what we think is reasonable and not base our buying decisions on simply hope and optimism. All right. So I know when I wasn't using this rule, once I'd get into like the negative ROI threshold, I would just hold on to it for 3 or 4 months because I know it's eventually going to recover. But now I've just destroyed my cash flow and I missed multiple selling cycles as a result. So if this was like our break-even line here at $40, even if we're at the $45 mark, I'm definitely not purchasing it. Just because there's clear history that it would not be profitable or a good chance. Using another example, and you'd be surprised how many questions I get on this. If our break even was like, say, like $5.50 here, this red line going across, but we had like this 1-day dip where it went below it. For me, like, this is where we use our own discretion. I still feel comfortable purchasing this. You might get this example or question from your VAs quite a bit until they build up their confidence. But I would purchase and feel confident buying like an item like this if we were profitable at $5.75. And I know this is a very exaggerated example back here. But even if, say, we were back in January and it was showing at $30 here, we would still avoid it because I would have fair reason to believe that the price could fall. And I think with all of the softwares and technology that's out there now, I think there's so many opportunities to find new ASINs that I'd rather use that money elsewhere. Okay. Ooh, this, my apologies. There it is. So sourcing criteria 7 of 11, we want the list price to be less than 110% of the buy box 90-day average. So what I mean by this is it helps quantify price spikes easily for a VA. I know when we get into price spikes in the beginning, a lot of VAs are kind of like taught, just whatever the buy box is, let's go with it. And when you try to quantify it, it can be really, really difficult. So using this like red line to like represent the 90-day buy box average, just because we're up here now doesn't mean that that's like realistic. So what we do is we require that if the buy box over the last 90 days was like $70, they would have to suggest a list price of $77 or less. And we'd have to still be able to meet our like profitability criteria. Okay. I know this one is like a little bit abstract, all things considered, but if an item has sold for $25 for the past like 12 months, and then this past month is now at $50, we just need to make sure that we can explicitly filter out those types of leads. The only exception, right, because there's always an exception, is if you know for certain a product is discontinued, you can get it at a reasonable price. And as a result, you know, like the price is going to increase. But most VAs aren't going to have that niche or category knowledge. All right, sourcing criteria 8 of 11, at least 30% ROI. I get asked this a lot. So we target 30% ROI. And when all things are said and done, expenses considered, we land at 17% ROI net. So sometimes I'll get asked, like, why don't you consider 20% or 25%? Like, do you ever want to fall below that? If you do, if I were to, in theory, go to 20% ROI, I would then finish out at 7% ROI because my expenses are going to all be the same. And once you're getting down to like 7% ROI, we're talking about like 3 or 4% margin, and that's just not the sign of a healthy business. All right. So we talked about the price leaks in our last webinar and kind of like how quickly that money can like go away. And as I keep like repeating over and over again, there's so many opportunities for 30% ROI or more. And we want to make sure that we're conserving cash flow because you never know when a deal is going to present itself. While on this slide, you'll notice that I don't talk about margin very much throughout this. We do not have any gross margin requirements. I know that seems kind of like maybe non-intuitive, specifically for like maybe a large item that requires a lot to ship. We've honestly not ran into many issues because when we go through and do our sourcing, if it's high returns, we just immediately shut it off because we have a good process for considering those expenses on the back end. And since we've always been capital constrained since we started this business, for us, ROI is far more important. If I'm going to finish at like 8% net margin on a product, but it's 150% ROI, and that's where I finish with after all expenses, like I'm happy. That one might be a little extreme, but we have some stuff that's pretty crazy like that. Okay. This is probably my second favorite and the hardest one to get through to all the VAs on our team. But this one's really important for protecting your time and protecting your account. So for every ASIN that we buy, we want to make sure that we expect to at least get $75 profit per month from that ASIN. And I don't mean that the ASIN's generating $75 profit per month. I mean, me specifically after expenses and after that I will make $75 profit from that ASIN. So my estimated sales per month times my expected profit per unit. So using this specific example here, at most it's selling 5 per month, $1.87. This is a $10 per month profit max ASIN. And definitely not something that we would consider even at 60% ROI. So one, this protects your time, and I'll list it all out on the next page. It's going to reduce your risk of violations, right? Because every ASIN is a risk, and it prevents like accumulated junk ASINs. These are the type of ASINs that sit in your store for 3 or 4 months before you decide just to liquidate a break even. So, and for every ASIN that you purchase, you have to go through the process of creating an MSKU. You might end up finding errors there where you have to like submit documentation, or like the 5886 error where you're providing images. You have one more ASIN that you have to go through and set up the repricer for. One more ASIN to update like the sourcing costs to make sure that Amazon's reimbursing you appropriately. You're adding additional complexity for your prep center, your warehouse, or in your garage for yourself to prep and receive. Account health violations. So we have about 1,000 ASINs active at any given point. I've got 21 violations in my account health. So I try to be really mindful and not open us up to additional like risk or harm. So I try to keep our storefront very clean, even ASINs that we're not planning on purchasing for a few months. And then additionally to account health, it's also one more ASIN to track for the invoices, order confirmations, and tracking numbers, making sure that we're keeping all of those in case we're ever asked within a Section 3. So there's a lot of administrative burden for each ASIN, and we need to make sure that it's worth your time, the warehouse's time, and then your administrative team side. All right, 10 of 11. This one's, I hear feedback that our next two is probably too low of a bar, but we can all adjust it for our individual businesses. So we want to sell at least 5 times as many sales as the competitive sellers. Competitive seller for me is within 5% of buy box. I believe even on the PDF that I'm going to send out on here, it actually says FBA only. Within my niche, FBM sellers are a menace. So we did start including those here earlier this year. So anyone within 5%, so using the buy box is like $93 here, we would have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 11 that we would classify as like competitive. So we would want to make sure that this is selling at least 55 a month, right? It's making sure that the velocity on the ASIN is at least fast enough to allow sellers to most likely sell through, so we don't get stuck with a significant loss or holding on to our product too long. I believe recently when I presented this, I was asked, like, do I consider stock counts? I personally don't. If I see this guy up here has maybe like 852 units, honestly, I wouldn't see it because I don't consider it for my criteria, but I would probably avoid it in that situation. But this is just putting an explicit criteria around what kind of velocity we're looking for. So this yellow line, of course, means there's at least, Keepa says 50 units sold per month. Amazon says it means 50 units. It really means 50 orders per month. So if this is a product that could likely be sold in the quantities of like 2, 4, 10, etc., then we can expect this to be confidently at least 55 plus sales a month. And then our last sourcing criteria is just making sure that it sells at least 20 per month as like a general rule of thumb. So if it's me and a couple other people, oh, Cassie, I see you put your hand up. If you did you have a question on that last one?
I was just curious, this is Seller Amp that you're using, right? So when you're looking at the number of sales, you're using what Seller Amp is estimating?
Not particularly. So I have a bonus slides coming up here where I talk about it. So I know my team and sources, they use Seller Amp's recommendation when it's like a non-variation listing. Seller Amp is extremely conservative, is what I'm going to say. And we can talk about like the data offers tab and how to be like a little bit more explicit. I'd say at this point, most of our team, we're sourcing items that sell 50 plus per month. So we're seeing those yellow lines pretty clearly. But if there was no yellow line here, my team would know to go into data offers tab, FBA only, look at the offer trends over the last 30 days and make an assumption based on that. And then they'll put that in the comments. Yeah. Did that answer?
Thank you.
Perfect. All right. So speaking to that, we just wanted to have like some minimum, so 20 sales per month. Technically, it kind of falls within all of our other criteria. So if we want 2 other sellers plus myself, and we want to have at least 5 competitive sellers, or 5 times as many sales as competitive sellers, we at least like need 15 as a bare minimum. I just found that this here was a much easier criteria for VAs to understand and stop them from having to do such a deep dive on ASINs, saving their time. So we'll use like the yellow lines when available. If there's no variations, they'll use Seller Amp and they'll be like, it sells 17 times a month, and then we'll find out it sells like 80 or 90. And when it comes to variations, we use FBA offer count movement. So I'll show that briefly. All right. So before I jump into like Keepa, I just wanted to give like a perspective, because I think so many times people like hide the numbers, but a lot of what I talked about was like protecting profit. So these are my top 25 ASINs from the last 3 months. So you'll notice 24 of 25 would be deemed as profitable. This finishes me out at 14%. This is actually 14% net margin before I include my actual expenses. So like relatively healthy for Amazon Wholesale. So this is including like prep costs and inbound shipping, but not like my VA salaries. When I go through and evaluate the reds, all of them but two is because of inbound shipping right now. That is dragging them down simply because we've been, a lot of these are like Q3 items for us and we're shipping a bunch in. So for example, like this item here, it's an oversized item. I shipped 450 in. So I'm paying for it on the front end right now. But the main thing that I want to point out is as a result, I'm sorted by revenue. But 24 of our top 25 ASINs are all positive, and we're not seeing a bunch of losses. And it's because we have 5 of our criteria protecting us from loss. And then while there are some, we have like one like hero ASIN right now that we're averaging about 10,000 profit per month. It's a little bit uncharacteristic. I want to point out that if you ignore that, most of these are maybe like 1,000 profit per month, which is still really good. But we have 900 plus ASINs not shown here, right? As we're going through this process, it really is a game of scale, bringing on a lot of ASINs and knowing that an ASIN that generates $200 or $300 consistently that you can replenish is really where the money's to be made and allows you to scale appropriately. So I don't think it's based off the group that I see here, since I know most of you. I think you guys are already like well aware of this, but I think a lot of people think within the Amazon space, you know, you need 2 or 3 private label products and you're going to make 50,000 a month. So I just wanted to like give that perception and as well as like a little bit of transparency, like for where our numbers kind of like land and like expectations, because some of our top ASINs are only like $800 a month in profit. All right, bonus slides for how to evaluate sales velocity. So again, the group we have here looks pretty experienced based on everything that I know about you all. But if you're not, and this is one that burnt me a lot in the beginning and cost me a lot of money. So within Keepa, you go to Data Offers tab. Truthfully, I've select Prime, but you should select FBA only because their data is much more reliable. And then we'll include historical ASINs on the back. And if you don't include this, you can end up missing out on a lot of sales history, actually. So if you guys want to check the data yourself, the ASIN is here. So this is by far the most accurate method to estimate sales velocity. I would definitely recommend you guys that see like a yellow line at 50 units sold per month to go in and check some of these, because you'll be surprised that it's really like 100 to 200 units per month, depending on your niche. So every variation listing, my team has to do this. If there's a variation listing and there's no FBA history and there's no yellow line, then we refuse to purchase it. To clarify, if there's no FBA history but there is a yellow line, we do purchase it because we do trust Amazon to be honest on that end. But I've bought a lot of ASINs 2 to 3 years ago where there's no FBA history, and I lost a lot of money by relying on FBM stock counts. So we'll jump to that on the next page. But FBM stock counts can, in my experience, are normally going to be tied as like a drop shipping concept. So the distributor might be selling the products to a retailer, but the FBM stock count is going to decrease as a result. So sorry that it's a little grainy here. So we're going to talk about cliffs versus drops. So when you pull up this last page here, you're going to see sold last 30 days. So this guy supposedly sold 146 because Keepa is doing their best to estimate it. But as we like to take a closer look, we'll notice that the data is not accurate and we have to do our own math. So at most, this guy had around 70 units on July 8th. Coming all the way over to August 1st, they essentially have 0. So if I was to analyze it, I'd say they probably sold 60 to 70 units over the last month, as opposed to the 146. So you're going to get these massive drop-offs. Normally that's going to be either a data error from Amazon, most likely. It could be Keepa misreading the information, or it could also be just a massive transfer between warehouses, which does occasionally happen. But that's why we don't want to trust the sold 30 days number, and we actually want to do our own assessment. I wasn't going to talk about it, but we might as well, right? Something that I don't have an example of here, but if you're looking at FBA only and everybody's flatlining, what it means is that they've most likely hidden their inventory. We can do like a whole webinar about like the benefits of this, but when you do that, you're going to want to expand this to like 365 or all time, and go back, and you'll normally see their inventory jump up and then flatline for like 2.5 years. And if an FBA seller's been on a listing with 10 stock for 2.5 years, you know they're selling because they're not going to leave it there. And then when you go back further, you'll normally see sellers like having the movement for sales velocity, and then like, crap, I want to hide this. And then they do, and you'll see the flat line. So that's something that I'm still teaching our VAs today, but you can find some really stellar ASINs because people don't go that extra step for data analysis. Okay. So for all of you that joined, I really appreciate it, as well as the participation. We'll go ahead and send off like a PDF of the 11 sourcing criteria. Thank you, Scott. And then we'll also send out like a replay of the webinar, which will be on YouTube too, in case you guys have any questions. But I really appreciate everybody joining today. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Thank you very much.